Moje poštovanje. Ja ću govoriti o tome kako se nedavna prošlost tretira u Srbiji.
I will be speaking about the way that we deal with the recent past in Serbia. I'll talk about the problems which at this point seems to be unbridgeable, you know, when it comes to facing the past. Over the past 20 years, there were many attempts to impose the topic of facing with the past as precondition for democratization and stabilization in the region. Thank you. So this is what the civil society is insisted upon, and partly international community. However, international community insisted more on cooperation with the ICTY, which, according to the public opinion in Republika Srpska, has been successfully completed. However, you know, at a time when there was a lawsuit of Bosnia and Herzegovina against Serbia was actually on the agenda, this was very topical. So the judgment is in a way crucial for what came afterwards, you know, because actually people, or, you know, the Serb elites, irrespective of the fact that they were labeled as a logistical support to the crime, has started with the denial of the genocide in Srebrenica. And this was also supported by a significant part of academia, which imposed a position that the Srebrenica was a war crime rather than genocide. 20 years has been enough to identify the trend which forms the Serbia when it comes to past. Of course, Srebrenica is the weakest link. This is a nightmare that cannot be denied. Srebrenica became a paradigm for all modern time genocides, you know, so that's why there is a lot of discussion about it in Serbia, and that's why it is often denied. Not to speak about Serbia appropriately is something that actually opens the door to discussion about this subject matter in Serbia, you know, and this is something that was actually brought up already in 1992 in the indictments against Karadzic and Mladic, when there were certain locations that were discovered for which there is a suspicion that the genocide took place there. So in Serbia, we didn't make significant progress when it comes to actually processing all this, because of course Bosnia and Herzegovina in the eyes of Serbia has been also perceived as something that is yet to dissolve or disintegrate, because the remaining status quo in Republika Srpska is still the top priority for both Republika Srpska and Serbia. After recognition of Kosovo, of course, we've seen actually a lot of threats that Republika Srpska will take the right equally as Kosovo, you know, took the right to secede from Serbia. So the process of development of the new national identity and the wars from 90s, in particular Srebrenica, have been suppressed and relativized. So of course there is need for just distribution of the territory without thorough analysis of the consequences of the war. And this is again something that is still on the agenda in Republika Srpska. So of course even the events from the World War II is used for the purpose of building the national identity and finding justification for the last war, because they see this as justification for what happened in the Second World War in Jasenovac. So of course, you know, this is somehow supported by the expectations that the international circumstances will change in Serbia. Another topic is that Serbia constantly is threatened by an external enemy, and this is actually something that was actually served as cause in the early 90s. So that's why they justified the war on its own. So we still speak about those who need to be blamed for the war, and of course this is all to distract from talking about the real reasons, those who have caused the war. There was no even distancing from the wartime policy of Slobodan Milošević, Dobrica Ćosić and all others creators of the Great Serbia program. So now they're perceived as a symbol of resistance, and it is emphasized that Milošević's plan has not been bad, but it was maybe unrealistic. However, the problem was about the implementation, and the best success is actually the resistance against the enemy. The centenary was also perceived through the prism of the current politics, and political orientation of Serbia. The World War I has been instrumentalized for the development, the better image of Russia and its patronage over Serbia. Then the partisan movement has been marginalized, where the Chetnik movement has been glorified, and the elements of anti-fascism have been denied. So now we speak more about the anti-fascism of Chetniks, and then opening of the mass graves from the 1945. All this really leads to the glorification of fascism and tolerance of the extreme right wing in Serbia. Serbia, which from the beginning of the war had an ethical position which was manifested in anti-war and anti-nationalist protest, they were marginalized in order to destroy any form of resistance and to create an image of homogeneous Serb nation. So there is a prevailing dominant about the Serbian position. So this is a syntagm that was taken from Crnjanski, and that this was a group of decisions which was prevailed by the strict national ideology as the broadest platform for self-consciousness. The creator of this phrase was Miro Lančar, who offers integralist model of the Serb culture as a fertile soil of three religion and dominant European traditions. So he argues that he's a guardian of the Serb spirit, but of course he includes all other nations as well. Russian presence continues, and it is expanded on the Orthodoxy as well. So they started to speak about the superiority of Orthodoxy, and that the mission of Serbia is the same to the one of the Russians, Greeks or Bulgarians, and that we need to carry forward our Orthodox tradition and to present it to the whole world. Under Russian propaganda, Russia has always been an ally of Serbia, and it is stated that actually that Serbia is now more pro-Russian, that they return to their Slavic rules, and even more, it is actually invited to support Serbia as an integral part of it, because Serbia continues its heroic struggle, and it is often flattered that Serbia can take a place in the European framework as a dominant or superior Slavic nation. Serbian elites are focusing very clear identity policies and building of historical memory and tradition, which is more or less falsified or forged, because of course they glorify the past and frustrating presence, and the gap between the two is huge. So in addition to this, there is inability to face with the past or to embrace the responsibility for disintegration of Yugoslavia. So the key assumption for overcoming the past is the existence of not only awareness about it, but also conviction that this was the first necessary presumption for the future. There were some attempts in Serbia to impose different version of the past and to relativize, the process of facing with the villain movements which stem from the radical movement. First of all, we need to have a demand for the truth in a society, be it within the society itself or something that is demanded by the international community. The social awareness is actually manipulated by the historical facts, and therefore now we have a perception that the Serbs are the greatest victims and that all others are their enemies. The second assumption is the political ability to face with the past, and this assumption depends on the relation or balance of powers. For example, genocide in Srebrenica best illustrates this. Liberation of Srebrenica, and that Srebrenica is not a genocide but war crime. So all these are the syntagms of the Serbian strategy, because they still manifest the aspiration that Serbia has not given up. So in that case, Srebrenica would not be the greatest war crime, in the modern history, but rather a part of the strategic plan. So to this end, we have the third assumption, and that is the change of the character or the nature, because after the fall of Slobodan Milošević regime, we have a deep frustration and dissatisfaction of citizens on one hand, and also an agreement between the democratic opposition and the close associates of Milošević, who have come into alliance. And the selection of Vojislav Koštunica for the president was the result of a consensus that was made among the members of academia, Orthodox Church, and this was also something accepted within the Serbian society. And the fourth assumption is the existence of political will. With the current government, Serbia is the only European society which restores the old regime. So they have cemented the possibility of facing with the past, and so they still deem that Milosevic's regime was the only right one. So when we look at the nature or the character of the Serbian society, we could say that they significantly contributed to the current state of affairs in Serbia, because the passivity or the passiveness have led us to the current state, because only a small number of population in the country perceived Milosevic as a great danger. On October 5th, the false interpretation that he presented in Serbia angle, we entered a new wave of violence, which became actually a new state of affairs in our society. See, this is fairly unfavorable position for the European Serbia. The state policy towards Serbia hasn't changed after the regime of Slobodan Milosevic. The national strategist ascribed great credits to Slobodan Milosevic because he mentioned through the war to expand his territory, which will over the time be consolidated as Serb ethnic territories. Now we are using different means, and they are greatly placed in the context of these new tensions between the Western world and the Eastern world. So, of course, all the statements of Milosevic are fairly confusing. The Prime Minister that advocates for different policy towards Bosnia and Herzegovina while preserving the right to actually claim the Republika Srpska as their own territory. Neither president nor prime ministers are the main holders of the policies towards Bosnia. It is clearly defined strategy which is supported by the alliance of elites, military, university, church, media, historians. So to change this strategy, we need to have a consensus of all these elites. They criticize the current prime minister because he has such an attitude towards Kosovo and Bosnia and European Union. Unreadiness of Serbian elite to be the public holder of the culture of memory, they in a way block the possibility of development of a modern Serb nation. And this shows that the Serb national project was widely supported and that everyone took part in it. The government and all elites except those who were actually part of the anti-war movement, which was also marginalized. So that's why the greatest danger for the future of Serbia and normalization of situation in the region is this theory of having Serbs all together under the same roof. I will just say in the end that the facing with the past is a transgenerational problem, and that it wasn't possible at all in the time behind us to expect from this elite to take us in a different direction, in a direction of facing with the past. However, when it comes to new generations that were brought upon the model that all Serbs are victims, it is absolutely necessary that we change that paradigm and that we try at least to change the direction that will be more oriented around facts. The future of the Balkans is uncertain. Bosnian issue is not only Bosnian issue, but also European Union. And the position of the international community towards Bosnia is a key, because it was the international community that developed the Bosnia in the form that it has right now. So this is and will be the challenge of the time ahead of us. So why the international community should be held accountable? Because it's really about the Balkan, or the type of the Balkan that the Europe wants, whether they want to have the Balkan fragmentized or Balkanized as it is, or we need to actually strive towards having actually a more consolidated Europe in this respect. So we also need to learn from the experiences that we now see in the Middle East.